It's a new day on DS9 and Kira's getting a phone call. An associate of hers, and one of the distinctly dodgy variety if mention of smuggling is anything to go by, has something he thinks Kira will want. It's information on a ship called the Ravenok, and she needs to come to him to see the evidence he says he has, as this dodgy associate of hers has had an unfortunate misunderstanding with some people that he's now trying to avoid. We learned the reason for Kira's interest during a meeting with Odo. She had a friend on this ship, which is why Odo wishes her luck in finding it, despite the disappearance having been some 6 years back. He knows she won't be able to rest until she's made sure. Sisko's cleared her for a little time off, it seems, though there is a caveat. The Cardigans have found out about what Kira's doing somehow and want to be involved. The Ravenok was a Cardigan ship, you see, albeit one carrying Bajoran prisoners, and the new peace treaty between Bajor and Cardassia means telling them to eat shit would be politically awkward. Kira doesn't look delighted by the idea, but as the ship disappeared before the end of the occupation, having somebody to tell any surviving Cardigans that they're no longer at war might prove useful. Time for the B-plot to arrive, and it comes in the shape of Cassidy Yates. She and Sisko are still dating. At least, I assume that's what Dax meant when she asks him if they had a good time last night. Perhaps Cassidy herself can provide more data as she joins the conversation. And the conversation might not be all she's joining. She's trying to get a job flying freight for the Bajorans, and the prospect of her being regularly in the area makes Dax suggest that she take quarters here on DS9. Sisko's a bit thrown by the idea, something that it looks like Cassidy picked up on, and they arrange to see each other later that night after she's been to Bajor. To the main story once more, and our Cardigan representative has arrived. Naturally, diplomatic relations are an important consideration for the new civilian government of Cardassia, which is why they weighed the impact of their decision and sent the guy who was in charge of the Bajoran occupation. To be fair, that's not simply a fuck you to the Bajorans, at least not entirely anyway. Seagull Dukat wasn't just in charge of the occupation, he was also the commander of the area, so this was technically one of his ships. That means he's the best person to bark orders if anybody's still alive, and that might prove useful for Kira's friend, who we learn was the person that recruited her into her resistance cell during the occupation. Kira's not chuffed about Dukat being here for obvious reasons, but at least she's in command, so once she gets tired of listening to him say the occupation was a good thing actually, she orders him to shut his bloody cake hole and relaxes. Back on the station, Sisko and Cassidy are having dinner. Her interview went so well that she was offered the job after only 20 minutes. Sisko's a little more reserved on the topic than Cassidy would like, especially when conversation turns to her having her own quarters on the station. Calling it a big step is not well received, and the lack of clarity during the resulting discussion on their relationship tips her over the edge. She leaves after saying she won't take the job, while Sisko contemplates how badly he just fucked up. Over in the Badlands, we're meeting Kira's dodgy associate. He's not chuffed at Seagull Dukat being here either, what with the brutal oppression and all, but Dukat proves himself useful by confirming the evidence is indeed from the Ravenok. Dodgy associate says he managed to find out where the debris was found, so off Kira and Seagull Dukat go. The system where the debris was allegedly found has a habitable planet, one with some wibblies that could be the remains of a ship. Habitable doesn't necessarily mean pleasant though, and some atmospheric nastiness prevents detailed scans or teleporting, so down we go in the megashuttle. It doesn't take long to find the wibblies on foot, which turns out to be the ship they're looking for. What's left of it anyway. Back on DS9, Sisko's being given advice. Dax thinks he should grovel a lot, Bashir thinks he should grovel only a little, and Quark reminds him that if Cassidy won't accept Sisko's terms, his holographic fuck rooms are very reasonably priced. Sisko rewards their advice by leaving. To the wrecked ship once more, and Kira thinks it wasn't an accident if the weapons marks on the hull are any indication. It didn't end well for some of those inside, but the fact that there are graves at all suggests somebody survived. Dukat wants to identify the corpses and insists on doing so alone, saying Cardigan death rites are strict about bodies being seen by outsiders. Bajorans, on the other hand, don't give much of a shit what happens after death, so he'll grab any earrings for Kira to identify while she has a poke around the wreck. She returns later to find him staring at some jewellery, and recognizes one of them as a Bajoran bracelet to indicate romantic involvement. She puts the pieces together and asks who she was, the practice of taking a Bajoran mistress not unheard of among officers. He says that what he had with Torana Prem was more than that, and refuses to elaborate. He collected those earrings, though, and we establish that Kira's friend was not among the dead, assuming his ear didn't get blown off anyway. We also establish that the ship was attacked by a couple of unknown vessels before crashing here, so there could be survivors or captives. By a handy coincidence, Bajoran resistance fighters were given a tracking implant that could leave a trail when activated. Kira's able to detect just this, and off they go to see what they can find. Kira decides to stop and rest some time later, partly due to lack of light. That also explains why Seagull Dukat doesn't see the spiky thing he sits on. Once Kira's pulled it out of his arse and the hijinks are over, she tells him that she found the name Torana Prem on the wreck's computer, along with a child called Tora Zial, and Zial is a Cardigan name. Seagull Dukat admits to being her father, and also that he's here to kill her. Kira's telling Seagull Dukat that she won't let him kill his daughter Zial, which feels like a thing she could prevent by either not tracking the trail or just shooting the bastard, but let's ignore that for now. Besides, he explains he has a really, really good reason for wanting to kill her. She'd be embarrassing. All this nonsense with leaving the Central Command to join the new civilian government made him quite unpopular with many of his old friends. If they found out he went dirty little bastard mode, they'd use it to attack him, and his wife and kids would be caught in the crossfire. He can't let Kira take her back to Bajor either for the same reason. As long as she's alive, she's a threat, and one that he means to correct, regardless of how much it pains him. Speaking of correcting mistakes, even Jake has decided to give his dad relationship advice after he and Eggnog thought the matter over. And to be fair, his conclusions prove the most useful to date, as he says his dad's afraid. Cassidy's willing to do all this stuff to be around him, and he's worried it'll be his fault if things go down the shitter, which is a pretty astute observation of somebody who's used to being responsible for everything. His advice? It's Cassidy's choice, so let her make it. Back to the desert we go and find a mining operation. Seagull Dukat identifies the guards as Breen, and he says they don't do too well in heat, so captured labour makes sense. Dead slaves don't mine though, which might be why somebody's handing out water, somebody who Dukat identifies as his daughter. Kira wants to fetch help, but Seagull Dukat's decided he's not taking orders anymore and intends to go in. That doesn't leave Kira much choice but to do the same, though she does at least threaten to kill him if he harms Zial. The start of whatever plan they had clearly goes well, as we next see them dressed as Breen to infiltrate the mine. They knock out another guard, and Kira identifies herself to a Bajoran miner. The good news is this miner knows Kira's friend. The bad news is he carked it a couple of years ago. The even worse news is some more Breen show up and start shooting, with Seagull Dukat taking the opportunity to leg it and find Zial while the others fight them off. It doesn't take long to win at least. Kira tells everybody to gather at the entrance to the mine while she follows Dukat. Kira finds him pointing a weapon at Zial. Her joy at seeing her father has faded for obvious reasons, but at least she was prepared for it, in a way. The other Cardigan prisoners had told her that he'd never allow her to live. This was the only thing keeping her going, though, and she says she wants to die if she can't be with him. Seagull Dukat drops the weapon and embraces her, telling her they'll go home, and will leave the viewer to decide how much of that is due to Kira pointing a gun at his back. Sisko has thought things over and decided to take the option Bashir suggested, grovelling just a little. He apologizes for how he reacted and admits it was largely due to nerves on his part. Just as well, then, that she's already taken the job on Bajor. Cassidy Yates isn't the sort of person to let somebody else's fears get in the way of her own life. That's her choice, after all. She'll be back soon to decide what quarters on the station she wants. And Seagull Dukat is taking Zial home to Cardassia. That's never actually been her home, of course, and it's probably going to be quite an awkward conversation with his wife when he gets there, but it's the thought that counts, I suppose. He says he'll keep Kira informed on how it turns out, which is either a promise or a threat, depending on how you look at it, so we'll leave her to worry about him turning up unannounced again, until the next adventure. It can be fascinating to think that the worst person you know also has nuance. It's a well-recorded fact that Hitler became a vegetarian, though that had little to do with him giving a shit about the well-being of animals by some accounts. My point is that the most despised person you can think of also had at least one redeeming feature, even if it was nowhere near enough to actually redeem them. That's the basis for our story today. Seagull Dukat is a distinctly awful person, and is here to do distinctly awful things, but only comic book villains throw back their heads and laugh evilly every 30 seconds. All of the real bastards in the world are more mundane than that. Dukat has feelings, and those feelings are sometimes extended to people other than himself. Not enough to consider the power imbalance we've already discussed in a previous episode clearly, and we could dedicate a whole video to just how disgusting that is, but he was telling the truth when he said this was more to him than simply having a mistress, at least from his point of view. Those feelings might even have been enough to prevent him from murdering his own child, depending on how much you think that was influenced by the presence of Kira with a gun. Or perhaps just the presence of Kira alone, if you take his previous behavior towards her into account. Whatever the reason, Zial survives, and Seagull Dukat's life will be more difficult as a result. Maybe not as difficult as he suggests, what with the new government being one to push for more civil liberty and freedoms, but more difficult than digging a shallow grave and rolling Zial's corpse into it with the toe of his boot. The show is trying to humanize, for want of a better word, the despot who terrorized a planet. What we're made to deal with as viewers is how much of that we'll allow ourselves to accept. For every line about taking Zial home, there's one where he states the brutal oppression of a species should really be viewed as a net positive when you think about it. As Dodgy Associate himself said in the episode, almost makes you forget that 5 years ago he was working Bajorans to death in forced labor camps and shooting anybody who tried to stop him. Almost makes you forget. We viewers are being given the luxury of a sanitized view of Seagull Dukat, the almost charming but slightly too oily version. The Bajoran people who suffered and died under his rule don't get that luxury. It's difficult to see somebody's good side when you can still remember what their boot heel looked like. Before we viewers rush to redeem Dukat, we would do well to remember that any scene with him in it should be viewed through a Bajoran lens. Let's tidy up the other bits from the episode then. First is some stuff we can infer about how things are going on Cardassia right now. That the new civilian government is still the new civilian government means the central command of the military is either gone, busy, or waiting. Seagull Dukat mentioning enemies suggests it's not gone, or he'd likely have no reason to worry, unless they're just upset that Dukat had the idea of switching sides before they did. Regardless, it tells us the Detapa Council is still in nominal control, though suggests that might not be a particularly stable situation. Second is the Breen. This particular species has been mentioned in passing previously in other Trek shows, but this is the first we see of them. Sort of, anyway, as we only actually see their environment suits. This was apparently due to those in control giving insufficient shits to create a new aesthetic for their biology, with the added benefit of there being no makeup costs as a result. I'll leave you to debate whether those factors played a part in their return later. Finally, we've another catch for the Babylon 5 crossover club with Razka, the dodgy associate of Kira's. Roy Brocksmith played a monk 1,000 years after the events of the show, and 500 after Earth got proper messed up in a civil war. Those who've watched that scene of the Season 4 finale may have noted quite a few similarities with a book called A Canticle for Leibowitz. Just because Deep Space Nine gets accused of nicking ideas from Babylon 5 doesn't mean that Babylon 5 was above the odd bit of borrowing, too. End of episode.
First things first then, we need to figure out where Astro Shian would be holed up.
I've told you I don't know. It's not something I got experience with. We didn't hide when those Starfleet people who turned out to be shapeshifters came looking for us on Voyager, did we? For the viewers who joined us after Voyager, that's in Space Dog Omnibus Part 4 if you want to catch up with story.
Wait, He's made collections of these credit bits?
Apparently, yeah.
They were only supposed to be to advertise the Patreon.
Yeah, and when was the last time we actually did that?
Fair point. To be honest, it's terrible value for money.
Really, though, you're all better off keeping your cash.
What were we talking about again?
Astroshen.
Oh, right. So where do you think they're hiding? And don't tell me you don't know. Just imagine you need to hide from someone you can't simply fart out of an airlock. Where would you go?
Well, close, probably. I'd want somewhere I could keep an eye on them. Distance is all well and good, but knowing what they're up to means you can adapt.
Very good. That is precisely what I would do.
Oh, bollocks.